Hey everyone, so I have read up to chapter 7 in the first Malazan book and I have some thoughts. So this is my first time doing a reading vlog. I'm excited to sit down and talk about my thoughts already. So I'm just going to go by chapter and talk about kind of what's happened and how I'm finding it. So with the prologue, the book opens in Malaz city and we meet one of our main characters who is a young noble. I think he's about 12 years old, called Ganois Paran. I don't know if I said that right, but I'm just going to say Paran going forward. And he is watching army forces, veterans known as the bridge burners, come into the city. And he meets a character called Whiskey Jack, who we get more time with later on and I'm liking so far. And Whiskey Jack is a seasoned kind of veteran and is a bridge burner sergeant. And one of the things that I really liked about in this chapter is how Paran tells Whiskey Jack that he wants to be a soldier when he grows up. And Whiskey Jack kind of warns him against that path. And I actually have the direct quotes. I'm going to use my Kindle to refer to key quotes as and when I need to. And he says to him, "The best life is the one the gods don't notice." And I do find it interesting how Paran kind of says he wants to be a hero. I do have a feeling that maybe he'll become that anti-hero. He'll become the very thing that he didn't want to be. I don't know, maybe I'm reading too much into it. I guess we'll see. But I'm very interested in Paran as a character. I like him as a vehicle by which we view the story so far. I just like his kind of innocence and his naivety, but he's also smart and intelligent. And I'm really excited to see how his arc continues to develop throughout the books. I'm assuming we'll see him kind of continue to age up. Obviously, when we meet him again later on, in the next couple of chapters, he's obviously older, but I'm just really curious to see what his arc is going to be. One of the other bits that that happens in this chapter is that we meet Surly, who also at this point now goes by the name of Lassine, and she is the new ruler of the empire after assassinating the previous emperor, and I guess she kind of represents the ruthless political current in the empire. It also seems like there's a huge divide between kind of the mages and then also the nobles, so there is a split and they're trying to kind of manage the nobles as well. What I like about this prologue and what I think it does really effectively is it sets the scene of what is going to be like a very epic fantasy, but in a very minimalistic way. It's not like super grand. It doesn't start with a huge battle or a huge court scene or anything like that. It's quite intimate, and we're already getting a sense that this world is big and it's messy and it's full of very powerful forces that are going to sweep ordinary people into their currents. I'm really excited to see where we end up by the end of this series, honestly. Then in chapter 1, so this brings us forward into the Empire's siege of Pale, and the story becomes much larger scale very, very quickly, and we shift to a character who goes by the name of Tatisale, and she is a Malazan military sorceress. I quite like her so far. Obviously, I've read about 6 chapters, so I'm liking being in her head. We'll come back to her more later. We also see Paran. He is older now and he's entering service. He's still quite naive, but he's kind of ready to take the next step. And we're seeing also like the brutal aftermath of long warfare. Take a sip. There's also a sense that there are very powerful like supernatural forces involved, like the moon spawn. We don't know like a ton about them right now, but I'm quite interested to learn more. And they have like a floating fortress and it's linked to Anomander, Rake, and Tista. I don't know how you say some of these names. Tista Andy as well. There's just like a lot of names. I will say Baker did partially prepare me for this. There's a lot of names, folks. So I have been having to refer back to the character list and things like that, but I think it's going to probably take the first book for them to stick. And probably more books, to be honest, because I know this world just opens up so much. We do also reunite with the elite bridge burner soldiers, including Whiskey Jack. We also come across some characters like Quick Ben, Kalam. I like Kalam so far, and there's a couple of other familiar faces. So this one, in contrast to the prologue, we are just thrown right into the middle of military magic warfare, and it also continues to really develop the political tension between the Empire's mages and the soldiers as well. Really like this chapter, very grand in scale. I'm just trying to remember if there's any like key quotes that I also want to mention. There's also a character that we meet called Rigger, who is a seer. She ends up being killed and her spirit takes over another character's spirit called Sorry. We'll come onto this more later. Sorry is a character that I'm very, very fascinated by. I'm really excited to learn more. Really, really excited to learn more. The hounds. The hounds were kind of terrifying, kind of scary, not gonna lie. The 7 massive hounds now sat around the men in the road. The eyes of these beasts glowed yellow and all were turned in the same direction as the man himself. So I wonder, yeah, so I'm assuming like part of their like soul is in the hounds, but really conjured up some like dark imagery for sure. We also get introduced to a character called Lorne, and I am really interested to learn more about this character. I've heard about this character before, like in other conversations, and I obviously had no idea who she was or like what she's like, so I'm really intrigued to learn more. And then we also find out that Paran is good looking. Lorne saw in Lieutenant Paran's face none of the youth that rightly belonged there. For all that, it was an easy face to rest eyes upon. There we go. There's like a massacre that happens as well. That was quite dark. The violence is manageable for me. I mean, I kind of guessed that Rigger had embodied Sorry already, like within that first time that they have after that conversation. But there's a comment, what's got her eyes looking so bloody old, when they're referring to Sorry. And I was like, yeah, that's definitely Rigger. Okay. And then there's an interesting quote here that I'll read. From a great distance in his mind came old, old words, live quietly. And I feel like that's going to bite Paran in the arse later on. Paran, whatever. Okay, let's move on to the next couple of chapters. I'm gonna go through these quite quickly. So basically for the next couple of chapters, we stay kind of within the siege, and Erickson builds both characters and also confusion. Like there are stuff that they're referring to that we just don't have any insight into, and I'm assuming we're going to learn about those later, and I'm fine to trust the author to show us that information when we need to know it. A couple of important threads here. So Tattersail becomes a clearer lens into how magic is actually used and how dangerous it is. Taskren, I don't know how you say these names. Taskren emerges as like as quite a powerful but potentially duplicitous high mage. Really interested to learn more about them. Sorry, as I mentioned, comes into this chapter, and as I've already kind of referred to, her body has been taken over and is being used by these godlike figures for their own inscrutable plans. Very interesting to see how that develops. And then we get more of the bridge burners as well, and they all already have like relatively distinct voices, relatively well-developed personalities, so I'm really excited to see how that continues to develop as we go forward. We continue to see more of the politics emerging. I think Empress Lysine is asserting her like total control, and the bridge burners, who were once elite heroes, are now distrusted even by their own leadership, because there's this whole like plot essentially to like undermine them. And I think if you're a beginner to fantasy, this is probably the worst place that you can start, honestly. I think you definitely have to be a fairly confident reader, because there's just like a lot going on, and you have to have the confidence, I think, both in the author and yourself, that you're going to figure it out. I really like the sensory detail. I'm quite liking the world building, though it is fairly minimal at this point. But yeah, let's move on to chapter 5, because I think chapter 5 and chapter 6 are I think chapter 5 is probably my favourite chapter so far. It's excellent. I also completely forgot to mention that in chapter 4, a really big thing happens, which is that Paran gets killed. And He doesn't actually die though, because somebody interrupts his death, but they're now going to use him as a tool to learn who is against the Shadow Throne's plan. So he's now basically become like a chess piece, and I'm really curious to see if he's going to be able to break that destiny. It's rumoured that Sorry tried to kill Paran. I don't know whether she actually did, or, you know, if it was somebody else. I'm curious to learn more about like what were her motivations for doing so, if she is the one who did that. By this point, I also forgot to mention that I actually really like Tassel as a character. She is kind of like the moral core of the book. She does things that she doesn't necessarily agree with, and she doesn't like, by the sounds of it, like she doesn't really like violence and like people dying. And there's numerous times where like she vomits when she sees like somebody being hurt. So she is very quickly become like the moral center of the book, and I'm really excited to see how her arc develops. Like I hope she's able to keep that and she doesn't lose it. And then there was a bit with the Gia, the Hound, was excellent. Again, like I think Erikson does tension really well. Really well. And then chapter 5 was an excellent chapter. So at this point, we shift from the Pale and we go into Darujistan. And Darujistan is like an ancient free city, and it has a completely different tone and also a completely different set of characters. So we meet a guy called Krupp, I don't know how you say it, Krupp, who is a very strange, loquacious man who is very, like, he's quite witty, but he like refers to himself in the third person, which I found quite funny. We also meet a thief who goes by the name of Crocus Younghand, and he's quickly becoming one of my favorite characters. I love this chapter so much, mainly because of how the perspective shifts between the thief and the assassin. I loved it so much. It reminded me of Joe Abercrombie, where he does that kind of quick POV shift in the same chapter. Everybody's experiencing the same thing, but they're seeing it through a different lens. So satisfying, and I hope we get more of this later, because I think Erikson writes that scene so well. Like I was completely hooked. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the page because it felt so tense and it felt very vivid, and it kind of felt like I was Crocus. It was so good. I like him as well because he seems relatively small compared to all of the other characters who are like soldiers and lieutenants and mages and sorceresses. Like he's just a thief. So I'm quite interested to see how he plays into the bigger picture. And I also think at this point we hear of the Ascendant, and I think this is the first time that we hear about the Ascendant, so I'm really curious to learn more about those. We also see the coin of the twin gods Opon, which Crocus picks up, and we did get a reference to this earlier on as well, or a similar coin. I'm assuming it's a different coin, but it's a similar coin. And I'm assuming these coins are going to have like a lot of significance later on. I really love this switch because I think the Darujistan chapters, at least so far, feel much more grounded and more intriguing to me because these are just like normal people. The world feels bigger in a lived-in sense, not necessarily just about brutal armies and magic. And I really think the perspective shifting here just works beautifully. Like each character is seeing a piece of the puzzle, and we as the reader are just getting parts of it, and we're getting the ability to piece it all together, which is super satisfying. Then let's move on to chapter 6. In this one, we see the story arcs combine. So we have the Pale campaign on the one hand, and we have the Darujistan plot on the other hand, and they begin to kind of mesh together. So the bridge burners arrive in Darujistan undercover, and Paran also travels there on imperial business on behalf of the adjuncts, if I remember correctly. The threat of the Empire's conquest becomes more real for the city characters because it's kind of alluded to in the previous chapter, but here we're seeing them start to be worried about it. Anomander Rake also enters the story, and right now he's super mysterious. Obviously he's very powerful, and like he's like almost completely untouched by the political squabbles of mortals. I'm really excited to learn more about him. And I think this is where the style of Malazan is really starting to click for me. There's like overlapping viewpoints, we're getting partial knowledge, there's secret motivations, and the sense that no character really has the full truth. And by extension, you know, we're only getting part of that truth as well. I really, really like Darujhistan as a setting so far. It's probably my favourite part of the book. I think it's atmospheric, it's funny, it's political, it's mystical, and it's a little bit chaotic compared to like The Pale, which is also, you know, got its own level of chaos, but it's like military chaos, which I'm perhaps less interested in. I'm going to just have a quick look to see if there's any quotes that I want to just flag. One thing that I found really interesting, just going back to Paran and when he is killed, is there's a lot of concern about him because he should be dead, right? And there's what happens is intervention. So that's when like somebody basically intervenes with the death, assuming it's like one of the gods, right? Intervenes with the death so that he can go and do their bidding essentially. And one of the characters, I can't remember who it is because I'm only seeing the highlights. Right, there's been a deep trauma, both body and mind. By all rights, it should be weeks before he recovers physically, and that alone could be a problem. But then he goes on to say, since damage, when it occurs, does so on all levels, shock is the scar that bridges the gap between the body and the mind. So there are potentially consequences that have happened to Paran that we just have no idea about in terms of how it's going to affect him, both physically, but more importantly, mentally, because they go on to say, whatever force interceded cared for nothing but healing the flesh. He may well be on his feet in a day or two, but the shock needs time to heal. Like, I don't think anyone's actually communicated that to Paran yet, so he doesn't even know that he needs to be worried about this. But I feel like this might be what triggers him becoming the anti-hero. I am almost convinced that Paran is going to be one of the really bad guys in this book. I know everybody's morally grey. No one comes out of this looking good necessarily, but I think Paran is going to become one of the main villains. Please do not confirm nor deny that in the comments, but that is just my hypothesis currently. I also just wanted to mention some of the world building. I really like it. So this is one of the bits in chapter 5 describing Darujhistan. By day, the rooftops were bright and hot beneath the sun, crowded with the fluttering flags of domestic life drying in the lake wind. By night, the stars and moon illuminated a world webbed with empty clotheslines and the chaotic shadows they cast. Oh, love a bit of imagery. Love a bit of imagery. Then there's also like an assassination that happens in chapter 6. One of like the ministers is supposed to be killed, but then the wife of the minister ends up being killed intentionally. So I'm really curious, like, what are going to be the consequences of that? So yeah, there's like a lot happening. I mean, all of that happened in the first 7 chapters. Like, that's a lot. And I've been talking for about 15 minutes. So I'm really, really curious to see how this continues to develop. I've read like the first third of the book now, so I just have no idea where this is going to go. Right now, my favourite characters are Paran, Tatisale, and I would also say Crocus, Young Hand, and I'm also really curious about Anomander Rake. So I just think there's a lot really going on, and while there's a lot to kind of keep up with, I'm also just having to trust myself and also Erickson that I'm gonna find out what I need to find out when the time is appropriate. So yeah, I'm kind of expecting for the next couple of chapters that the Empire's plans for Darujhistan will escalate quickly. I think Crocus and whatever this weird magical coin is, he's going to be pulled into some like cosmic stuff. I don't know. Bridge burners will clash with the city factions, and I think Paran's political loyalty will also be tested now that he's got this like godlike thing holding his death over him. So yeah, I think I'm going to stop there, folks. That's my kind of assessment so far. Really, really liking it. A little bit lost at times, but that's okay. And yeah, I'll be back when I have another update. See you soon. Hey everybody, I am back with an update. I am now up to chapter 12 and things are really, really getting going, and I'm really, really enjoying it. I have to say, there are certain parts that I am enjoying more than other parts, but we'll come on to that later on. So this next like 5 chapters that I've read feels like the book is clicking into a new gear. The Darujhistan chapters are still my favourite. I like how he shifts perspectives really quickly. I like the thieves and the assassins, the city politics, but I am also starting to warm up to the military plot and also the god level plot, which are like crashing directly into that plot line in Darujhistan as well. Everything is starting to converge, and potentially in a very violent way. let's go through key chapter beats. So chapter 7, if you see me just looking there, that's because that's where my notes are. So chapter 7 really reinforces that Darugistan isn't just a political chessboard, it is actually a fate chessboard. We open with Krupa, I don't know how you say his name, Krupa and the dream logic again, and they're quite meta. I'm not the biggest fan of them, but I have a feeling, oh well, not even just have a feeling, they are going to play like a really key role beyond just being metaphorical. An elder god presence clearly is involved, and there's this ominous sense that loss is already written into the future. This whole idea of like predestination, which is a big theme in Baker's works as well, and I really like that. One line that really stuck with me, and I'm paraphrasing, is the idea that some battles are entered already knowing that they will be lost. That is obviously not particularly comforting, and I'm really curious to see kind of how that actually plays out over the course of the series. Back in the city, the Simtal turban ore mess continues to deepen, and their plotting is petty and vicious, and it's becoming obvious that Darugistan's elite are morally hollow. I mean, we already got the sense of that pretty much from the start, but it's really come through. Simtal's obsession with destroying coal feels less about survival and much more about control. Meanwhile, there's a bunch of other characters. They're setting the stage for Getarone's fate, and at this point, the party feels like a pressure cooker. Like, I just have a feeling so many things are going to go wrong at this fate. Everybody's plans are funneling towards it. The biggest shift for me in this chapter probably relates to the coin. Barak and Krupa essentially confirmed that this isn't just a lucky charm, it is actually divine interference itself. Krupa realizes that an ascendant is in play, and Barak's reaction to that is pure dread, understandably. The subtext that we get from this conversation is that if the gods are paying attention to Darugistan and they're potentially going to start interfering, then normal politics is no longer going to be enough. Like, that's not the status quo anymore. So I feel like the book is starting to feel much more dangerous. I feel like the stakes are rising every single chapter. So let's jump into chapter 8. Before I do that, I'm just going to take a sip of my tea. So this chapter brings us back to the bridge burners, and I quite enjoyed this chapter. I've felt a little bit disconnected to the bridge burners so far, but this one I feel like brought me back to them and kind of re-anchored me to them. So Whiskey Jack, who's a character that I'm quite enjoying, takes control. He knows that the Empire is setting them up to fail, and he refuses to walk into a massacre, which any sane person would probably do. Their infiltration plan, basically like blending in and planting themselves quietly, feels like it makes sense, but it's also coming from a place of desperation. There's also this subtle moment where Sori mentions she knows how to handle the boat. It's played lightly, but it is picked up on by a number of the characters, and it also rang alarm bells for me because, as we know, Sori was a fisherman's daughter, but her body's been taken over by like a seer, right? And it's basically showing that her past life hasn't completely gone. So it does bring up the question around, like, if a god or a seer or a magical individual takes over just like a normal human, like, what are the actual consequences, and what does that actually mean for the person they've taken over? Like, are they completely gone? By the sounds of it, that is not the case. Then we get Quick Ben and Hairlock, and this is where Hairlock kind of genuinely starts to become quite terrifying. So far, he's kind of been just a bit weird and like a bit odd at times, but now he's becoming like genuinely terrifying. He is clearly very unstable, paranoid. He is convinced that the gods are watching him, and the worst part is that he might actually be right. And Quick Ben realizes that he's lost control of the situation. We can feel his calculation, I guess, shift from managing Hairlock to thinking about potentially eliminating him, which I think kind of makes sense given what Hairlock is like. The chapter ends with the bridge burners heading towards the city, and it feels like this is the quiet before the storm. Then we get to chapter 9. In this chapter, we are with Lorne, Toole and Tok. I really, really like this chapter. I feel like there were so many great bits that I noted down. And I feel like Toole is the sort of character that is kind of like an encyclopedia, and we're learning more about the history of the world through him, which I quite like. They're not necessarily just exposition, they're also like warnings to the characters. Like, as an example, when he says like they're on the right track, Tok actually gets uneasy by that. And so did I. As a kind of extension, it's clear that whatever is going on here isn't just about like a military objective. Back in the Pale, the tension between the Malazan leadership becomes explicit. The Empire is completely fractured. I mean, it's been hinted at quite a lot, but it is basically called out here. Personal grudges are influencing decisions, and loyalty is starting to mean less than obedience. The dinner confrontation between Lorne and Tatisdale was absolutely fantastic. I love that scene so much. Lorne's hatred is an abstract, so just to remind people, Tatisdale, her and her like command basically killed Lorne's family, like brutally as well. And we can see that there is now like a deeply personal tension and hatred between these two characters that actually makes a lot of sense. And I really felt for Lorne. I really like both of these characters. They're both already becoming like favourites, but I particularly like this interaction between them. I do really feel for Tatisdale as well, because as I've said before, she is like the moral centre of the book. And the fact that she ended up taking a different job after that happened, I think says a lot to her character. One of the most striking things is how easily Tatisdale could be executed if politics tilts in the wrong direction. It's not, power here isn't necessarily just about justice and control, it's also about convenience, which I quite like. We also get open acknowledgement that multiple ascendants, Shadow, Chance, are interfering around Darujhistan, and at this point, this book is basically saying that this is no longer just a mortal conflict. There's a lot more going on here. Just a couple of other bits and pieces. I'm really liking Tok the Younger. I have a feeling that he's going to be really, really important, and I also vaguely remember that there were rumours that his dad might not be dead. Can someone correct me if I'm wrong? I might be confusing him with another character. There's so many characters in this book. But I feel like somebody made a reference that his dad died, but then he said he went missing. So he could still be alive. I could also be talking about a different character. Please clarify if that is true. I find it funny as well that Tok lied for Tatisdale at the dinner because he fancies her. I mean, he's going to be annoyed when he hears about her and Paran getting it on, which they do in this chapter. And yeah, there's so many references to Chance, Opon. I think that's just going to become more and more pivotal to the story. Before I go on to chapter 10, there is like this final image of the crone flying to warn Kaladin Brood. I love that like imagery, and I'm really curious about Kaladin Brood as a character. Like, we've heard about him a bit, but we haven't spent like a ton of time with him. And it's interesting how like every faction in this world is aware that something catastrophic is coming, and everybody's spying on each other, and it's all going to boil to the surface at some point. Let's talk about chapter 10 now. This was a pretty intense chapter. So Tatisdale basically leaves to go and like investigate some stuff, and another character called Belladin goes with her, like not by her choice. He's been sent by that mage, I forgot his name. I'm still not used to all the names, folks, but what, like that, the guy who they're all like annoyed with. This basically leads to Tatisdale dying. Like, it basically leads to her magical annihilation. Tatisdale realizes what Lorne is actually planning, and Belladin refuses to believe the Empire would ever do something so reckless. So we're kind of also seeing how like people blindly believe things just because authority tells them. Anyway, and this refusal on both sides kind of basically costs them everything. The magic that is unleashed here feels primordial. like warrens overlap, something ancient gets torn open, and when it's over, Tattersail's gone. But she's not actually gone. Like there's the small footsteps leading away from the blast site, so we know that she is still alive in some form. Paran's reaction is really important because I feel like he loses innocence in this chapter. He's been presented as quite naive and a bit confused, but he kind of becomes someone with purpose now after he finds out about what happened to Tattersail. He swears vengeance on Lorne, and for the first time, I actually think, you know, this guy is finally going to do something that isn't as a result of somebody else telling him to do it. This chapter kind of shows that death in the world of Malazan is like not very simple. Transforming into something else is often worse than death. So I'm really excited to see how that plays out. Then we get to chapter 11. And this one was quite difficult to follow in places, but I did really enjoy it, what I understood of it. So we start with Kruppa's dream, and it confirms that Tattersail's soul didn't vanish, something new was born, and that whole scene was very vivid and kind of creeped me out. Clearly like very symbolic. I would like to reread it again, but I like how unsettling it made me feel. Then we go back into Darujhistan, and I love the way he does world building. I think sometimes it can be a little bit heavy-handed, but I think in this chapter it was done perfectly. The perspective shifts between Kruppa, Crocus, Rallick, Murillo and Sorry, and it just makes the city feel very alive. Everyone is watching everyone else, and the Sorry seer cracks are huge here. When she hears the word seer by Whiskey Jack, it basically like triggers her and she falters. And that's the clearest sign. I mean, we already knew it, but that's the clearest sign that the seer is still inside. One thing that really stuck out for me is how she basically admits that she should kill Crocus. So Crocus saw her, well, he didn't see her, but he knows that she killed this like guard to get into this pub, which I thought was hilarious, by the way, because the guy was being an idiot. But she kills him, like she stabs him, and she goes into the pub by the bar, and then he sees the blood on the knife, so he knows that she did it, and she says that she should kill him because he knows, and yet she doesn't. So something's going on there. Like I feel like maybe that's not the seer, like I feel like that's the other more human part of her that's stopping her from doing it. I wonder if like her soul is also like a battleground, which is quite an interesting idea. Then we have another moment with the coin. It spins openly in the Phoenix Inn, and it's no longer hidden. Fate is literally like wobbling on a tabletop. Finally, Quick Ben also makes his move and he enters the Shadow Realm. So he's not just like some clever guy, he's actually actively dangerous. So there's like a lot going on. Ultimately though, it's all kind of going into this like one master plot that's going to bring everything together that I'm really excited to see in action. I don't really know what's going to happen though. Like I genuinely don't know. I feel like Erikson is not afraid to kill off people. Now, one interesting thing about this is that this book technically uses resurrection as a trope, but it's so embedded into the magic system that I actually don't mind it. And I've said this before, I really like the whole idea of gods interfering with the mortal world, and I'm actually quite liking how it's being done here. The only critique I have right now is that some of the conversations are really repetitive. I think some of those could have been cut out or shortened significantly, because it's like we've already, like I'm over halfway now, and I get that he's setting the scene and all of that. But it's like, yeah, we get it. Like, we know these are different factions warring against each other. We know that Sorry is part seer, potentially part human. Like, but these things are constantly hinted at. It's like, yeah, we get it. I am trying to be more forgiving of this one because I believe this was Erikson's debut, which is crazy. So maybe he was a bit heavy-handed for that reason. I'll be interesting to see if that kind of reduces down in book 2. I hope it does, but it does get a little bit annoying. So anyway, let me do quick kind of key characters that I'm liking. So Kruppa is no longer just comic relief. He is connected to deeper currents, potentially more than anybody else. Quick Ben, now he's clearly becoming one of the most dangerous minds in the book. Sorry, I feel like is kind of like the emotional core for me. Her internal struggle feels inevitable. Crocus, really like him. He's probably my most favourite character currently. The whole conversation, I forgot to mention this, the whole conversation with his father about him basically going into government was great. I really like that part. I hope it actually happens, like he becomes like a government official and we get that lens as well, beyond just like military and thieves and assassins, but we actually have like a government official. But the fact is he's doing it so he can get with that aristocratic lady, I forgot her name, but I hope it happens because I quite like kind of political figures in the sense that they're working within the government. But I'm really liking him. I feel like he's possibly going to be one of the most important characters in this series. I don't know why, it's just a gut feeling. Then we have Whiskey Jack. He's steady, he's human, he's surrounded by people who are trying to get rid of him. We have Perrin, who's finally becoming his own person, driven by loss instead of ambition. And then we have Lorne, who is not just an antagonist, but she seems like a bit of a catastrophe, to be honest. A couple of predictions going forward for the next kind of couple of chapters. I think Gederone's fate is where multiple plots are going to detonate at once. I feel like multiple people are going to die. We'll see. Hairlock's end, I feel like, is also coming, and it's not going to be quiet. Shadow's involvement guarantees that there will be some collateral damage. The ancient tyrant will wake, and it will take more than one faction to stop it. I feel like old enemies are going to have to become allies. Sorry will break, and I think it's going to come at a critical moment. I think Perrin will confront Lorne, and that confrontation will redefine both of them. And I feel like Darujhistan will never ever be the same after the events of this book. So overall, I'm liking it. Just really excited to see where it's going. And yeah, I'll check in when I read the next couple of chapters. See you soon. All right, so I'm back. I'm now up to chapter 22 and things continue to really pick up. I will just say one comment that I made in one of my earlier check-ins is that this book is definitely very repetitive. There are lots of conversations that just repeat over and over again. And I get that this is a debut. I get that this is set up, but it's a bit much. I'm not gonna lie. Like, I think you could have cut about 300 pages of this book off. This is over 700 pages, this book, and I think it is unnecessarily long. I will be a bit more forgiving because it is a debut, but it is starting to grate a little bit, and that's coming from somebody who likes that sort of stuff. I think it's erring on the side of a little bit too much. But anyway, let's jump into my thoughts on kind of what's happening and things like that. So chapter 12 begins to tighten kind of all the plots to a common endpoint, and that is Gederone's fate and the approaching convergence of forces in Darujhistan. Baruch and Crone meet and they realise the threat from the south isn't just some rumour. The Jagut tyrant could actually wake up soon and completely devastate the city. At this point as well, like, bear in mind, Darujhistan is kind of like this hub. It's this kind of incredible city where there's a lot happening, and it sounds quite amazing, to be honest. So this is potentially catastrophic for the people who are based there. Meanwhile, Quick Ben is bargained with the Shadow Throne in the Warren of Shadow to basically neutralise the rogue mage Hairlock, offering him as a target for the Hounds of Shadow in exchange for his own safety, because he was basically marked. So he has now exchanged Hairlock for his own kind of mortality, I guess. Quite liked it because I like the idea of like negotiating with gods, and I'm becoming more warmer towards Quick Ben. Before, I was pretty indifferent to him as a character, but I'm liking his character more and more. We also see that there are kind of people converging, as I said at the start. Assassins are hunting assassins. The bridge burners are becoming more embedded. Politicians are completely clueless as to what is happening, and the gods continue to meddle openly. I think this chapter kind of made me think that Malazan is not really about linear build. It's about spirals intersecting, and I quite like that. Where the way the bridge burners, Baruch's cabal, the assassins, and the gods are all positioning themselves for the same coming storm is like quite interesting to read. I do wish though that it had been sharpened a little bit and some things have been taken out. Let's go to chapter 13. So this one is a really good chapter. It kind of toggles between a bunch of different groups. So we have Rallick Nom, who pulls Crocus aside and warns him to stay off rooftops. He tries to get Crocus to report to his uncle Mammoth because something deadly, a claw operative, is in the city and not everybody is who they seem to be. Rallick is wrestling with his own dark path, contemplating whether avenging Cole will be his last act of humanity or push him past the point of no return. We have the Tist Andy at Moonspawn report losses for an encounter they attribute to a claw and a powerful mage. Whiskey Jack reflects on Moranth and the cost of this covert war. I'm really liking Whiskey Jack as a character, and especially after Quick Ben returns injured and describes fighting Tista Ande assassins, he's kind of even more on edge. Sorry thinks about Crocus again. This is one of the threads where it's just getting a bit too repetitive. Sorry keeps thinking that she wants to kill Crocus and then she doesn't do anything about it. And it's just like circular at this point, and I'm almost certain that she's not going to kill him. So it's kind of like, why are we building up this tension so much? She has kind of personal and political motivations, and she considers following some of the other folks so that she can go and kill Crocus. Baruch and Rake argue over trust and strategy. Rake is acting independently and Baruch resents that control. And then we have Kruppa, who has another dream from Krull about the Jagged magic and Tastil's accelerated growth, or I should say rebirth. So this chapter, I think it kind of gives you the why of like why everybody is converging here. I mean, we've already had it discussed and hinted at, but I think this is where you're really seeing everything come together. Rallick's internal monologue, someone who is known for being quite composed, is like struggling with moral choices, and I think that really adds weight to his arc. I like those quieter moments, but I do think that right now there's a bit of an imbalance and we need to start seeing things happen. Then we have chapter 14. So kind of all the different dynamics are aligning here with secret assassins, claw agents, and Durajistan's underbelly begin kind of showing their hands more. There's a lot of kind of tension here, I guess, as Murillo, Rallick, and Kruppa's networks get more active. The bridge burners keep adapting their kind of covert sabotage, observing, preparing, and trying not to be spotted. I do like those scenes, I will say. It kind of reminds me of Assassin's Creed, where you're naturally kind of spying on people and trying not to be seen. I love that sort of stuff. And the build-up of the threat just continues to increase. We get kind of more layers of character depth. I'm not going to go into it too deep, folks, because it just continues to build on what we've seen previously. So yeah, I think Erikson, I can tell he's the type of writer that really likes to draw out the build. I'm okay with that for now, but I can see that getting tiring very, very quickly. Another character that I like that comes up in chapter 15 is Anomanda Rake. This is like the sort of character that I really like, and Rake and Baruch are allied. We kind of see it to continue to solidify. Baruch still thinks Rake may be using Darujistan for his own ends, and Rake makes it clear that he's not there to rule the city but to protect it. I'm dubious, but let's see. And then a bunch of other characters like Rallick and Murillo continue to scheme, and yeah, the like machinations of the guild and the Daru Street kind of continues to thicken. He's really good at making the world feel alive. I just think it's like getting a bit too much, to be honest. And I think this is like my number one critique of the book so far. Like it's a bit too much. Chapter 16, so this continues to escalate and there's more paranoia. Rumours swirl about assassins operating within the city walls, including whispers of Claw and Malazan spies. Baruch tries to centralise the city's defences. Kruppa tries to manipulate events behind closed doors. And then as we continue to go through this, there's more personal moments and things like that. Yeah, this is basically just pure like character build up at this point. Then in chapter 17, spy games continue to intensify. Can you see like it's very repetitive, and I get wanting to build it up. It is too much though, and just things continue to intensify. It's great, but you need some degrees of release, and I don't know, we're not getting it as much as I think we need to be totally honest. Maybe the ending will make it completely worth it, and I'm gonna completely eat my own words at the end of this video, but currently it's a bit much. So spy games continue to intensify. Rallic intercepts information that suggests Ocelot, who is the assassin guild master, could be out to get Cole, not just for political reasons, but for like deeper power play reasons. At the same time, Baruch and Rake have a very revealing conversation about why Rake is involved, and he doesn't want his people to fade away, which I think adds a bit of emotional depth to his presence. As I said before, I really like Rake. He's the sort of character that I really like. I have a feeling that he's incredibly duplicitous. While there might be some kernel of truth to this, I think he has a longer game in mind. We get kind of a better sense of the city's defense networks and kind of how that's becoming more concrete. Yeah, I think this is a good example of like espionage really shining and it being a really core part of kind of Ericsson's toolkit. It just continues to build. Then in chapter 18, this is where the Jagged Tyrant threat gets synchronized with Darajistan's fate. His energy, or its energy, is approaching, and magical like tremors can even be felt in the city. So it's really kind of coming to a head now. The bridge burners and their allies really begin to sense that something is amiss and something is about to go wrong. Not necessarily just about political danger, but that there is something ancient building, like some ancient power is building. We also get some more insight into Lorne. She is flailing a little bit. She's normally very controlled and ordered in how she thinks about things, but we're seeing that she's making mistakes and her restraint is slipping, and the prolonged focus on her personal mission is perhaps kind of causing her attention to fracture. The city watch and the nobles are still completely clueless on a macro scale, which I like that because I think it reinforces how detached they are from ordinary life compared to say like cosmic level problems that we're being presented with. We're basically still on the path to like unavoidable collision. Like something unstoppable is coming. It's not like something big is going to happen and we're all going to get over it. Like something is going to fundamentally change the course of events. All right, chapter 19, so we get unification of multiple different arcs. So we have Lorne decides to plant the Jagged Tyrant's Finest, which is like a power store shaped like an acorn inside a wooded garden in the city. And this is very much deliberate. It's her strategy to shape the environment before the tyrant wakes. Crupper reflects on fate and the protection around Crocus, sensing that unknown forces are involved. A rare moment, at the very least so far, where we've seen him kind of doubt his own calculations. Crocus and Apsalar, so I kind of skipped this a little bit, but Crocus and Apsalar. Apsalar is the name that Crocus gives to Sori, because Sori has gone through like a bit of a journey. Her like original self before she was taken over by Rigger is starting to come through, and she is like forgetting things but remembering things, and we're learning that if like a god or a seer takes over a mortal being's body, they don't necessarily take it over fully, and that original person that was there is it can kind of creep through. Crocus and Sori or Apsalar, their kind of relationship is developing. I quite like some of their conversations, they're quite funny, and they are making kind of tentative moves towards the Simtal estate, who is one of the kind of politicians or like aristocratic families, I should say, which is also the scene of the upcoming fate. We also have Whiskey Jack's bridge burners attempt to embed with the household guards It's a bit awkward, but it's very strategic. Paran and Kalam coldly prepare to assassinate Lorne. Paran admits his own exhaustion and doubts. And I do really like Paran as a character. I continue to really like him because I think he's very self-aware. We're seeing him lose his innocence in real time. I think the revenge plot was a little bit too quick, in my opinion. Him and Tassel barely had like 2 conversations. All of a sudden he wanted to kill Lorne. I do think it potentially hits at a bigger thing with Paran, which is that because his body had been taken over by a god, he kind of felt that loss of control. At this point, it's been told repeatedly by other characters that the god has now left him. So he's kind of like not in the control of a god anymore. We don't know what damage that has had on him. I'm gonna take a pause. So this chapter was quite good because we are starting to see everything set in place, and there's like a good combination of like personal arcs developing, plot points developing, and then also like bigger stakes developing. So it was quite good. Let's get to chapter 20. So I'm gonna kind of skirt over this one a little bit. Things just basically continue to develop, and yeah, there's not like a ton that happens, I don't think. But basically people continue to embed into their kind of respective parts of the city before everything blows up. And then chapter 21 feels, I mean, I hope it is, because I feel like I've been saying this book has been building up pretty much since chapter 1, but this feels like the kind of final assembly before the explosion at the Fate. Sorry, I think I've muddled up my notes a little bit, but this all happens up to 22. I have been taking notes. That's why if you see me looking there, it's because I have to read my notes, because there are so many different threads in this book, and I don't personally find it that hard to keep track of all of them, but I do have to make kind of little notes here and there. Otherwise it can be quite difficult for me to just kind of keep an eye on where everybody is. It's quite fun, I don't mind it. But the point is that I feel like we've got to the point where kind of like 20 and 21 are the final chapters before everything kind of explodes, and everyone's positioning themselves in their kind of respective parts of the city. And yeah, I don't really know what's going to happen. I think we're probably going to get some character deaths and maybe some resurrections later on in the series. Something's going to happen that's going to irrevocably change kind of each of these characters' directions. I still am convinced that Paran is going to become like really evil. He'll still be morally grey because we might understand his reasons for doing what he's doing, but I have a feeling that he's going to go down a dark path. There's a couple of things that I want to pick up on. So Hairlock, I think, is one of the most ridiculous characters I've ever read. And that might be a bit of an exaggeration. But the character doesn't feel that scary, even though on paper he should be terrifying. Like, he's a puppet animated by a fallen mage's soul, twisted by chaos. That should be terrifying. But in practice, I actually laughed quite a few times when he speaks, because he's mostly shouting out about his own madness in like panic loops. And it reads less like somebody who is like genuinely insane and someone who's kind of just like losing the plot, but like not in a convincing way. Like, I think if you compare him to some of the other characters like Anamanda Rake, who to me is like very composed, quite eerie, and like there's something quite sinister about him. You have the Shadow Throne, who's very subtle and clever. And then you have like other characters like ancient powers like the Tyrant, who are like looming and inscrutable. Hairlock just doesn't have any of that same weight. And I just felt like the chapters with him in it were like really pointless. I don't know. Maybe there's like a broader thing here that I'm missing. But I just did not like it. I did not like it. I actually tagged a couple of lines, but unfortunately my Kindle is in another room and I cannot be bothered going. I'm really tired, folks. I ended up going to bed quite late last night, so that's why I'm a little bit low energy today. But yeah, like I think that character is kind of pointless, and I don't really know what he brings to the story. I just don't really like him. So anyway, I want to wrap up. So where I am and predictions going forward. I mean, obviously we're going to see everything kind of completely explode. The Jagged Tyrant's presence will break free, and the Finnest is planted by Lorne. Things are just going to go absolutely crazy. I think Rake will show why he's one of the apex figures of the series. His calmness, his composure is a really great contrast to the panic everywhere else. Sorry, Apsalar, her internal conflict will continue to matter. I think her hesitation around Crocus foreshadows something deeper. I don't really know what that looks like. Paran's arc, Paran, I don't know, folks. I noticed that I've been saying Paran and Paran interchangeably, like in the same video. It's okay, it's fine. We're just gonna go with it. Paran's arc continues, shifting from pawn to agent. I think like his exhaustion and these little tiny bits of like defiance are really setting him up for something big. I personally think it's going to take him down the dark path, but we'll see. And one thing I will say about kind of like world building, I do really like how Darajistan itself is a character. I have a feeling that it will never ever be the same again after the events of the next couple of chapters. So that's kind of where we're at right now. I think overall I'm liking it. I am really curious to see how the next like couple of chapters go. The next time that I speak with you folks now will likely be once I finish the book, because I only have about 10% left. So I will finish that tonight, the day that I'm filming this video. And yeah, I'll do kind of the chapter breakdown and then my kind of overall thoughts on the book. But I am liking it. I'm not loving it. You know, I compare it to something like The Darkness That Comes Before by R. Scott Baker. And that's a pretty chunky book too. It's like 550 pages, if I remember correctly. I think the thing I loved about that book that this book doesn't have, I think that book has a lot of restraint. And I think it was good, because when things really kind of hit the fan later on in the series, that restraint completely goes away, and it feels kind of rewarding for the reader, because you spent that time really getting a sense of like what's going on. We do get that here. The problem is though, is that it's very repetitive. So we are relearning the same thing over and over again. Whereas in The Darkness That Comes Before, we are learning new information all the time. Even if we don't know if it's important, Baker is constantly giving us new information all the time. And I don't really get that here. Like I get that he's like building the stakes, building the characters, this is all stuff that I love. As many of you know who watch my channel for a while, you'll know I love that sort of stuff. But I do think there is a balance, and I think currently the balance is quite off. So I'm really curious to see how the next kind of 10% of the book finishes off, because I'm expecting like a bang now. And if it continues to build up and like only the last chapter is a bang, I'm going to be pretty disappointed, folks. So anyway, I'm going to pause it here. I'll check in with you when I have another update. Thanks. Hey folks, I am checking in with my final update for the reading vlog, because I have now finished the first book in the Malazan series. Before I go through like my overall thoughts and everything, let's finish up with the last couple of chapters. So just as a quick reminder of where we're at up to chapter 22, I fully realised my last check-in was like very low energy and I think I missed some pretty big things because I was really tired yesterday when I filmed in my check-in. We got a little bit more energy today. I do apologise that the video is quite dark. I will try to fix that in post-production. It's really dark in the UK in the morning. It's like not that early, but it's quite early, I guess. And it still hasn't kind of fully lightened up yet. So we're just gonna have to do what we do. I do have a light on, but my lights in this room are like fairly dim. But It is what it is. Anyway, so quick lead up summary, and if you see me looking down, it's because I'm looking at my laptop. So the Malazan Empire, as we are aware, I'm just going to do a quick recap of where we've come from the start up to where we are now. So the Malazan Empire is trying to take over Darujistan, but they're trying to do it very quietly without open war. The bridge burners, led by Whiskey Jack, who's a character that I'm really liking, are embedded in the city undercover, fully aware that the Empire would sacrifice them if it meant success. At the same time, the city itself is tearing away at the seams. There are multiple assassination plots running in parallel. Raluk Nom is targeting Turban Or. The Claw is operating in secret. And there are also criminal guild politics with political interference. On the supernatural side, things have escalated up until this point dramatically. The adjunct Lorne, who is guided by Tool, has awakened a Jagged Tyrant, an ancient being whose power threatens to overwhelm everything nearby. Worse yet, Lorne has planted the Tyrant's Finist, I think is how you say it, which is its stored power inside Darujistan itself, like right in the middle of the city, which has effectively turned the center of the city into a place of like magical catastrophe or impending magical catastrophe. The gods are no longer subtle. Shadow Throne and Cotillion, I think is how you say it, are directly interfering with events. The Coin of Opon, who is the god of chance, is in play, also bending coincidence and survival around Crocus, who is a young thief who never asked to be in play but is now being used as a pawn. Crocus is a character that I'm really liking as well. At this point, several key losses have already happened. Tattlesail is gone, though we do know at this point that she has been reborn into something else. Her fate is definitely unresolved. And Tok the Younger is dead, who was killed abruptly and completely without ceremony, reinforcing how kind of unforgiving the stakes in this world are. I have a feeling Tok is going to come back at some point because like rebirth is quite a big theme in this story, at least. I don't think he's like completely gone yet. Emotionally, everyone is at breaking point. Paran has turned against the adjunct because of what happened to Tattlesail and plans to kill her. Apsalar, who also goes by the name of Sorry, is no longer a passive vessel and is starting to make her own decisions. Rake has fully committed himself to the city's fate, and Kruppa is quietly steering people behind the scenes towards what feels like an unavoidable collision. All of this has happened or is happening on the eve of Gedaron's fate, a massive social event where nearly every major character is kind of ending up in the same place. By the time we get to chapter 22, which I'm about to jump into now, the situation is simple and it's terrifying. Every plot thread, whether it's political, military, criminal and divine, has converged on Darujistan, and whatever happened next is going to break the story wide open. Let's go into chapter 22 now, and I'm going to keep this like relatively high level. Pretty much every thread meets at Lady Simtal's fate, and the whole place is kind of screaming fire. There's first outside of the city we have Raced, who is the Jagunt Tyrant, and he is rampaging. He's basically held together by sheer sorcery and spite. He kind of comes across as a little bit petty and pathetic, to be completely honest with you. He ends up just destroying anything he can because he can. Like, he kills like an innocent traveller. He ends up taking out like a guard tower. It's like, dude, like I get it, but come on. Then there's like a bit of a twist, which is that Kruppa pulls Raced into like a dream trap. And in that dream, we get Tool and Krull involved. This is kind of like a signal, right? That this isn't just like a typical let's fight the boss ending. Krull's whole kind of sentiment here is that the rules are changing and that even gods and ancient tyrants aren't operating in a stable world anymore. Essentially, nobody is safe and the balance of power can flip sides very quickly. I quite like that. It's quite thrilling. It's quite ominous. we like that sort of stuff in our dark fantasy. Back at the estate, the emotional core for me is Sorry, who also at this point is now known as Apsalar. Paran and Kalam find her in the garden, and she is no longer the possessed assassin anymore. She is scared, she's disoriented, and she remembers enough to be horrified by what's happened. Paran's reaction in this scene makes a lot of sense in my opinion. At first, he reacts quite negatively, but then he has that conflict when he notices how she is behaving. But then at the same time, there is that kind of reluctant shift into compassion when it's clear that she is also a victim. The horror mystery also continues to grow. Like there's that weird block in the garden that was placed by Lorne. It's called the Finest Seed, if I've pronounced it correctly, and it starts turning into something alive. There's roots, expansion, the whole kind of atmosphere is that this is not kind of normal, typical magic for this world. And Mallet can't even get close to it without her Warren rejecting it. And meanwhile, we get the political dagger twist. Kalam offers Vulcan a deal on behalf of the Empire, essentially assassinate the Cabal mages, get paid absurdly well, and then also get rewarded with more power. And Vulcan takes it. Can't blame him, to be honest, but I also feel like this is going to bite him in the arse later. It kind of shows as well that the Empire really wins behind closed doors with like shady deals rather than on the battlefield. Crocus overhears enough to realise, oh, my city's protectors are about to get removed, and he gets sent to warn Barak and his uncle Mammoth. And then the terrace becomes a crater because the possessed figure shows up, which is Raced hijacking Mammoth, and unleashes like a catastrophic blast. Paran vanishes when Chance gets hit, Whiskey Jack gets injured, and Quick Ben goes into like full power mode. Yeah, it's pretty crazy what happens in this chapter. And he basically reveals multiple Warrens at once. And what we've understood of Ben is that he has a lot of power, but we haven't really seen like the full capacity of that power. And now we're getting some insight into that, and it kind of recontextualizes who he is as an individual. The chapter ends with the Azath problem forming in the background. It's still TBD, like what is going on with the Azath and like what it actually is. I don't know, I feel like maybe I missed something here, but it kind of feels like the story is preparing to solve Raced in what I'm assuming will be the most Malazan way possible, which is that it's not going to be like a heroic kill. There's going to be something really strange happening. So that's kind of where we're at the end of 22. I quite like this chapter. There's like a lot happening, and it all is kind of finally starting to come together. And then we get into chapter 23. Before I do that, I'm going to take a sip of my drink. I'm going to finish my drink. So this is where we're starting to see some consequences. So we get a big moment with Paran. He gets pulled into shadow and has a really tense exchange with Cotillion. And what I love here is that Paran is really developing into his own self. He's growing a backbone, and he refuses the cruel option. And he basically chooses Apsalar's humanity over vengeance or truth at any cost, which I really respect. And this is why I really do feel like a kinship to Paran. I did pretty much from chapter 1, but it's continuing to grow as the book progresses. And then Paran actually gives up Chance, the sword, I guess is like symbolic of himself, of him cutting himself off from Opon's grip. Opon's grip, I don't know how you say half of these words. This is basically him saying that he is done with being a pawn on a chessboard. Lorne is spiraling. At this point, she realizes that her big plan didn't work, and she plays her last card. She releases a Ghislaine, I don't know if that's how you say it, Ghislaine, demon lord to kill Rake. Rake is also one of my favorite characters, and I feel like we don't know a ton about Lorne right now, but I feel like this is peak Lorne. And her duty has turned into desperation. She's basically saying, I'm happy to burn the world if I absolutely have to. On the street level, Crocus gets targeted, and basically the Crimson Guard intervenes, and it's a bit of an abrupt entrance, but it also makes the world feel bigger at the same time. There are other powers that we still don't fully have insight into that are moving behind the curtain, and I quite like that. Lorne's end then comes. It's brutal because it's not particularly epic. She is wounded, she's exhausted, and she gets finished off by essentially what are two like local agents doing the city's dirty work. So it's like a very like unheroic death. It's a very quiet death for someone who's been treated like a weapon throughout the entirety of this first book. And then Paran arriving after and giving her that final dignity kind of felt like poetic justice in a way. It doesn't completely absolve her, but it does make her tragedy really resonate. And then Paran has a moment with Opon where he basically directly tells them to back off, because it's twins, right? Opon is like two twins. And them actually backing off is like a very clear sign that Paran is not a normal person in this world, but it's also a clear sign that mortals aren't always just pawns for the sake of the gods, which I like that. Because I think sometimes when you have it very clear that the gods are like overly powerful and they can never be beaten, it kind of muddies the stakes. But I quite like the fact that mortals can actually go against the gods. In the sky, we have Rake versus the demon, and Rake just kind of fully goes into his honest self, and he's actually quite terrifying. Dragnapor does what Dragnapor does, and the demon isn't just killed, it is actually imprisoned. And I feel like this is one of the themes, right, which is like containment, consequence, and like the eternal price that you pay for doing certain things in this world. So by the end of 23, race is being handled by forces we barely understand. The demon is dealt with, Lorne is dead, Paran is changing into someone with actual agency, and the night is still not done. So let's go into the final chapter, well, before the epilogue. So chapter 24 is basically people living with consequences. So it's cleanup, but this still involves like assassins and political shifts, seismic ones at that. And Crocus gets to Baruch's place and we get the fight, Volcan versus Baruch, with Sarat defending and ultimately dying. This is where Crocus gets quite a funny, like heroic moment with the bricks. It's kind of absurd, but it also kind of works. And I think it also just reinforces that he really is just like a normal kid who is doing something to the best of his ability in the middle of like god tier magic politics. Is quite funny. Then the Phoenix Inn is the final moment of the book. The bridge burners contact Dujak, and the message is that they're outlaws now. The Empire has completely thrown them away and doesn't value them. And Dujak is going to ally with former enemies against the Panion Seer. So this is like, you know, it's the first book of however many, 9, 10 books, whatever it is. And I feel like the series is starting to open up. The story stops becoming about Malazan is conquering this specific city, and it becomes about multiple powers realigning for something much, much worse. Paran is named commander, and Whiskey Jack is elevated, and the squad chooses each other over the Empire, and I love that. And Kalam and Fiddler choose to escort Apsalar home, and I think this is showing the bridge burners at their best, where they are very competent, they're quite brutal, but they also do have a kind of sense of morality and duty to each other. Back at the estate, the Azath fully forms, and Rallic carries Vulcan inside for sanctuary, and that feels like Malazan closure. The world doesn't seem to always punish cleanly. It repositions pieces into stranger places. And then the Darujistan crew, Cripper, Murillo and Crocus, they regroup and they have a bit of a moment to breathe. Then we get to the epilogue, and it gives us that kind of bittersweet feeling that epilogues often do, especially when it's early on in the series. The bridge burners depart, the friendships are intact, but the future is unstable and also pretty unknowable at this point. Paran has this like weird moment with Tatterdale and basically confirms that this relationship between them, this connection between them is not over. The perfect capstone to finish off the story is that Crocus throws Opon's coin away. It's the book's thesis in miniature. I feel like luck and gods can shove you around, but at some point you have to decide what you're willing to carry. And that's it. That's where it ends. And I really think where Erikson shines is when all that convergence comes together and everything is bang, 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 bang. I'm not sure at this point if he's as good at the build-up, but he's very good at like when everything basically goes to crap. So that's it, folks. That is me done with Malazan. So I'm now going to stop filming here because I'm going to do a separate video where I do a full spoiler review of the book. This is just my reading vlog. I wanted you guys just to kind of get a sense of my thoughts as I was reading the book. I think maybe just as a quick kind of like framer for that next video, I don't know which one will go live first, maybe the reading vlog, maybe the review, I'm not sure. It kind of depends which one gets edited first because the reading vlog is going to be quite a long video, so probably the review will end up going first. But what I will say is that I have very mixed feelings about this book currently. Like I finished this last night and I kind of felt like this is really setting the scene, and I get it, it's one book out of however many books. There is promise here. Like I think Erikson is quite a talented writer. Like there's a lot of stakes that have been built up. But on the flip side, I also feel like this book was potentially trying to do too much, and at the same time just used way too many words in what could have been a book half the size of what it was, in my view. There is quite a bit of context dumping that I didn't enjoy. There's a lot of repetitive conversations that just didn't need to be in this book. Again, I am willing to be a bit more forgiving because I believe this was his debut, so I get it, but I will be very interested to see if this continues on in the next books. So I'm going to pause it here. I hope you guys enjoyed the reading vlog and keep an eye out for my review or vice versa, depending on which one goes up first. Hope you enjoyed it. Let me know down your comments below. If there's anything that I said that particularly kind of stuck out for you, feel free to bring it up in the comments below, and I look forward to seeing you there. Thanks for watching. Stay safe, take care, and I'll see you very, very soon.